The sky above the icy mountains of Iceland was clear that morning, but the wind carried a strange silence. It was the kind of silence that came before something unforgettable. Cameras were being set up across the valley, lights adjusted, and crew members moved like ants around a frozen field. This was the biggest scene of the movie, and everyone knew it. Keanu Reeves, calm as ever, stood near his motorcycle, checking the controls himself. He had done countless stunts before, but today felt different. Even he could not explain why. Sandra Bullock watched from a distance, holding her coffee cup close. She had arrived early just to watch Keanu rehearse. Their friendship had lasted through decades of fame and chaos. They shared an unspoken respect, the kind that did not need words. As Keanu smiled at the stunt coordinator and nodded, she felt proud but uneasy. Something inside her whispered that this day would test more than just their acting. The director shouted, "Ready when you are!" The crew took their positions. Keanu mounted the bike, wearing a leather jacket and a thin layer of protection under his costume. The scene required him to speed across a narrow, icy bridge, slide under a burning structure, and stop just short of a cliff. It was dangerous even for him. The cold air stung his face as he put on the helmet. "You sure you want to do this yourself?" the assistant asked nervously. Keanu smiled softly and said, "It's all part of the story." Sandra shook her head with a sigh. She had seen him do impossible things before, but there was something different about his tone today. She turned to the makeup artist beside her and said, "If he gets hurt, I'm running in there no matter what." Everyone laughed, thinking she was joking, but she wasn't. The cameras started rolling. The sound of the motorcycle broke the silence of the valley. It roared across the ice, spraying crystals of frost in the air. For a few seconds, everything was perfect. The director leaned forward in excitement. Sandra smiled, whispering to herself, "That's Keanu." But then it happened. The rear tire of the bike hit a hidden patch of black ice. The machine lost balance in an instant. Before anyone could react, the motorcycle spun violently, throwing Keanu to the ground. The sound of metal scraping ice echoed through the valley, followed by gasps and screams. The cameras stopped. Crew members froze in shock. The director dropped his headset. Sandra's coffee cup fell from her hands as she sprinted forward. Her heart pounded so loudly she could barely hear the crew shouting her name. She ignored everyone, pushing through people trying to stop her. Keanu lay on the frozen ground, motionless. Blood from a cut on his forehead mixed with the frost. "Call the medic!" someone yelled, but Sandra was already kneeling beside him. She touched his arm gently and whispered, "Keanu, can you hear me?" His eyes flickered open for a second and he tried to smile, but pain crossed his face. "I'm fine," he muttered weakly, but Sandra could see he wasn't. His breathing was shallow, and one of his legs was twisted at an odd angle. "No, you're not fine," she said firmly. "Don't move!" The paramedics rushed in, carefully lifting him onto a stretcher. Sandra refused to move away. She held his hand tightly as they carried him to the medical tent nearby. Inside the tent, the doctor checked his pulse and started examining his injuries. Sandra stood beside him, her eyes fixed on his face. "How bad is it?" she asked quietly. "A few deep cuts, maybe a fracture," the doctor said. "He's lucky." Sandra turned toward the entrance, where the director stood looking frustrated. "We'll need to stop shooting for the day," she said. "We can't," the director replied. "The light will be gone by afternoon. We can finish his close-ups without him." "You're not serious," she snapped. "He just got hurt." "You can't replace him like a broken prop." The director avoided her eyes. "Sandra, it's business. He'll understand." She took a step closer, her voice low but firm. "Business doesn't matter when someone's lying on the ground in pain. I won't shoot a single scene until he's okay." The crew behind the director went silent. Nobody had ever heard her speak like that. The director sighed and walked away, muttering about lost time. Sandra turned back to Keanu, who was now conscious but pale. He tried to joke, whispering, "Guess I made the scene too real." She smiled faintly, brushing a strand of hair from his forehead. "Don't talk," she said softly. "Just rest. I've got you." The doctor cleaned his wounds and wrapped his leg. The wind outside picked up, howling against the tent walls. Sandra sat beside him silently, her eyes full of worry. Hours passed. The set had gone quiet. Most crew members waited for news while others packed equipment. Sandra stayed, refusing to leave his side. She remembered their early days in Hollywood when they were both unknown and struggling. She remembered how Keanu had once stood up for her when a producer yelled at her on set. He didn't have to, but he did. He always did the right thing, even when nobody was watching. Now it was her turn. As night fell, snow began to drift outside the tent. The world outside was cold, but inside, there was warmth between two friends who had seen too much of fame to forget what truly mattered. Keanu looked at her weakly and said, "You shouldn't stay here all night." She smiled and replied, "You would have." And he knew she was right. At that moment, fame, cameras, and deadlines meant nothing. It was just two people who had shared a bond built not on lights or screens, but on kindness and respect. As Keanu drifted into sleep, Sandra whispered, "Everything will be fine. I promise." The storm outside grew stronger, and no one knew what tomorrow would bring. But one thing was certain. The accident had changed everything. It had awakened something in both of them, something far beyond the world of fame. The story of that day was only beginning, and what followed would test not only their friendship, but their courage, their hearts, and their faith in kindness itself. The next morning came with a pale light creeping through the thin walls of the medical tent. The storm had passed, but the world outside still looked quiet, like nature was holding its breath. Sandra sat in a chair beside Keanu's bed, her eyes tired but calm. She had barely slept. The doctor's words from last night still echoed in her mind. He needs rest, maybe weeks of recovery. No stunts, no movement. The news had spread fast across the set. By sunrise, everyone knew that the production might stop. The director had spent half the night on the phone with producers, arguing about schedules and costs. Sandra didn't care. All she cared about was the man lying in front of her, breathing slowly but alive. Keanu opened his eyes with effort, blinking at the dim light. For a moment, he didn't seem to know where he was. Then he saw Sandra and gave a faint smile. "Did I ruin the movie?" he whispered, his voice soft and rough. Sandra leaned forward and shook her head. "No movie matters right now," she said gently. "You need to rest." He tried to sit up, but pain shot through his side. He gritted his teeth and fell back. She caught his arm quickly, steadying him. "Easy," she whispered. "You don't have to be the hero today." "I don't like people worrying about me," he said with a tired smile. "Too bad," she replied. "You've earned it." They both stayed silent for a moment. Outside, the crew worked quietly, trying not to disturb the tent. The sound of footsteps and equipment echoed in the distance. The director peeked inside, holding a tablet with anxious eyes. "Keanu, we're behind schedule," he began. "If you can manage even a sitting shot, we could—" Sandra stood up instantly, cutting him off. "No," she said sharply. "He's not moving anywhere. The doctor said he needs complete rest." The director sighed and looked at Keanu, hoping for a different answer. But Keanu nodded slowly. "She's right," he said. "Give the team some time. We'll make it work later." The director left, muttering something about costs and delays. Sandra sat back down, watching Keanu's face carefully. He looked calm, but she knew him too well. He wasn't just worried about his injury. He was worried about everyone else, the crew, the budget, the movie, even the fans. He always carried more than his share. "You don't have to fix everything," she said softly. He looked at her, surprised. "I just don't want people to suffer because of me." "They won't," she replied. "You've already given them more than enough. Sometimes kindness means letting people care for you too." Her words made him silent. He stared at the ceiling for a long time, then nodded slightly. Hours passed slowly. Keanu slept again, and Sandra finally stepped outside for the first time since last night. The cold air hit her face, sharp and clean. The set was almost empty now. Only a few crew members remained, adjusting equipment and clearing snow. In the distance, she saw the motorcycle lying half buried in ice. The front wheel was twisted, the metal dented, and the frozen tracks told the story of how close things had come. She walked toward it quietly. A makeup artist followed her, saying softly, "We all thought he was gone for a moment. It was so fast." Sandra touched the damaged bike gently, feeling the cold metal under her hand. "He's lucky," she whispered. But it wasn't luck. It was grace. The assistant looked confused. "Grace?" Yes, Sandra said. Some people carry light with them. Even when they fall, that light protects them. He's one of those people. The assistant nodded slowly. You are too, she said before walking away. Sandra stayed there for a few minutes looking at the mountains. She thought about how fragile everything was, how fame and success meant nothing when one accident could take it all away. She thought about how Keanu had always faced pain with silence, how he had lost so much in life yet never turned bitter, and now, she realized, it was her turn to be that strength for him. Later that afternoon, she returned to the tent with food. Keanu was awake again, sitting up slightly. He looked pale but alert. You didn't have to bring me lunch, he said with a small smile. I didn't, she replied. But I knew you'd skip it if I didn't, he chuckled quietly. You know me too well. She sat beside him and opened the container. Eat, she said simply. As he ate slowly, the doctor entered with a clipboard. The x-rays are back, he said. Your ribs are bruised but not broken. The leg will heal soon. Still, you need to stay off it for a few days. Keanu nodded. Thank you, doctor. After the doctor left, Sandra looked relieved. That's good news. He smiled faintly. Maybe I'll be back on set sooner than you think. Or maybe, she replied, you'll rest properly for once. He laughed softly. You sound like my mother. Then listen to me like one, she said, smiling. As the day passed, reporters began calling the studio. News of the accident had leaked. Social media filled with posts, hashtags, and headlines about Keanu's injury. Fans from around the world sent prayers and love. Sandra scrolled through her phone and read some of them aloud. Listen to this one, she said. Keanu Reeves always helps others. Now it's our turn to send him strength. He smiled weakly. People are kind, he said. They learned it from you, she replied quietly. For a long time, they sat in silence again. The tent was warm, but the world outside was uncertain. Production was paused indefinitely, and no one knew when things would return to normal. But for Sandra, something had shifted inside her. She looked at Keanu and thought about how fragile yet beautiful life was. Fame didn't define them. Kindness did. And now that kindness had come full circle. That night, as Keanu slept peacefully, Sandra made a silent decision. She would protect him from the chaos outside. No pressure, no deadlines, no headlines. She would make sure the world gave him the time he needed to heal. Not just his body, but his spirit, too. She turned off her phone, looked at him one last time and whispered, Rest easy, my friend. Tomorrow, I'll take care of everything. The storm outside had ended, but inside her heart, a new one had begun, the kind driven not by fear, but by love, loyalty, and respect. The next morning, she would face the studio, the press, and the world. And what she said that day would change everything about how people saw kindness in Hollywood. The morning sky over the Icelandic camp was painted with soft gold. The snow sparkled under the rising sun, but the warmth of that light could not melt the tension spreading across the set. Everyone knew what was about to happen. The producers were arriving, and they were angry. The schedule was broken, the budget was rising, and the media was already circling like cold wind around a fire. Sandra Bullock stood outside the tent, waiting for them. Her face was calm, but inside she felt the weight of everything pressing down. She had spent the night preparing herself, knowing that today she would have to fight for something that had nothing to do with fame or money. It was about respect, about humanity, about doing what was right. Inside the tent, Keanu was awake and sitting up. The doctor had helped him move to a chair near the window. He looked stronger but still pale. He saw Sandra through the open flap and could tell from her stillness that something was about to unfold. They're coming, aren't they? He asked quietly. She nodded without turning around. Yes, and they won't like what I have to say. He smiled faintly. When did that ever stop you? She looked back at him and smiled too, though her eyes were tired. Never, she said softly. A few minutes later, 3 black cars pulled up near the trailers. The doors opened, and the producers stepped out, wrapped in thick coats and serious expressions. One of them, a tall man with silver hair, walked straight toward Sandra. Mrs. Bullock, he began coldly, we need to talk about this delay. It's costing us hundreds of thousands each day. She folded her arms. Then stop counting money and start counting people, she said quietly. The man frowned. We're not heartless, but this is a production. We have deadlines, contracts, investors, and you also have a lead actor with cracked ribs and a crew who watched him almost die, she replied. You can replace sets, you can rebuild props, but you can't replace a person. The other producers exchanged glances. One of them stepped forward, trying to sound reasonable. Sandra, we respect your concern, but this is business. Keanu's already agreed to light scenes. We can shoot around his injury. You don't need to interfere. She took a deep breath and said, I'm not interfering. I'm protecting what's left of our decency. Nobody works until he's fully okay. Not even me. The silver-haired producer's voice hardened. You're not in charge here. Maybe not, she said, but people listen to me. And if I walk off, the headlines won't say the movie stopped because of me. They'll say it stopped because you didn't care. For a long moment, no one spoke. Even the wind seemed to pause. The crew members nearby looked away, pretending to work, but their ears were open. The producer's jaw tightened. You'd risk your career for this? Sandra met his eyes. I'd risk more than that. A deep silence followed. Then, from behind her, Keanu's voice broke it gently. She's right, he said, stepping out of the tent slowly, leaning on a cane. Everyone turned to him. He looked weak but steady, his eyes calm and strong. You all know how much I care about this project, he said softly. But pushing people beyond limits never made a great film. Compassion did. The crew here has given their hearts every day. They deserve a moment to breathe. We all do. The silver-haired producer sighed and rubbed his forehead. Fine, he said finally. We'll delay 2 days. No more. Thank you, Sandra said quietly. The producers walked away, clearly unhappy but defeated. As they left, the crew started clapping softly. It wasn't loud, just a ripple of respect moving through the cold air. Sandra turned toward Keanu, who smiled weakly. You shouldn't be out here, she said, moving closer. You shouldn't have had to fight alone, he replied. You taught me that, she said. He looked confused. Taught you what? That silence can be strong, she said. You never argue for attention. You just act with kindness. And when the time comes, people listen, he chuckled softly. That's funny, because you just taught me that kindness sometimes needs a loud voice. They both laughed quietly, a rare sound among the tension of the day. As the hours passed, the set returned to a fragile calm. Snow melted slightly under the pale sun, and the crew began repairing equipment. Sandra stayed close to Keanu, helping him walk short distances to stretch his leg. At one point, a young crew member approached them nervously, holding a small notebook. Mr. Reeves, she said softly, I'm sorry to bother you. I just wanted to say thank you. When my brother was in the hospital last year, you sent him a message. It gave him so much hope. Keanu smiled kindly. I remember, he said. How is he now? He's doing better, she replied, her eyes bright. He watches all your films. You're his hero. Keanu nodded, touched. Thank you for telling me that, he said. After she left, Sandra looked at him and said, You see what I mean? Your kindness reaches people in ways you don't even know. He smiled faintly. Then maybe it's working both ways, he said. That night, when most of the crew had gone to rest, Sandra and Keanu sat near the edge of the camp, watching the northern lights dance above them. The colors rippled across the sky like silent waves. You know, she said softly, the world sees us as stars, but they never see this part. The fear, the pain, the moments when everything feels fragile. Keanu nodded slowly. That's why kindness matters most here, he said. Because under all the lights, people forget we're human. She looked at him for a long moment, the green light reflecting in her eyes. Then let's remind them, she said. He smiled. Together? Always, she replied. The cold wind brushed past them, carrying with it a quiet peace. Somewhere behind them, the crew laughed faintly around a fire. For the first time since the accident, everything felt still, almost healed. But what they didn't know was that a new challenge was already rising. A storm not of weather, but of words. Tomorrow, headlines across the world would twist their kindness into scandal. They would question motives, invent stories, and force both Keanu and Sandra to face the harshest test of all, the strength to stay kind when the world becomes cruel. The next morning started with noise, not wind. It was the kind of noise that didn't come from nature, but from people chasing headlines. Outside the Icelandic camp, black vans lined up. Journalists stepped out with cameras, microphones, and questions sharp enough to cut through air. The crew, who had been calm the night before, looked tense again. They knew what was coming. Inside the main cabin, Sandra sat with a cup of tea, scrolling through her phone. Her face turned pale as she read the words flashing. Across news screens, Keanu Reeves injured during filming, production halted after Sandra Bullock demands control. Rumors rise, on-set clash between stars and producers. Is Hollywood's kindest man hiding the truth? The words stung like ice. They twisted everything that had happened. Instead of kindness, they painted chaos. Instead of compassion, they showed arrogance. Sandra turned the screen off and looked toward the window, where Keanu sat quietly, reading a book. He didn't seem surprised. "You've seen it, haven't you?" she asked. He nodded slowly. "Yes. Same story, different day. They make it look like we did something wrong," she said. "Like standing up for you was a crime." He closed the book gently and looked at her. "People see what sells. Truth takes time." She sighed deeply, leaning against the wall. "But this isn't just about gossip. The studio will panic. They'll blame you for the delay, me for the headlines, and the crew will be scared." Keanu smiled faintly, the kind of smile that came from someone who had faced storms before. "Then we remind them who we are," he said quietly. Later that afternoon, the producers called a meeting in the dining hall. Everyone gathered, actors, crew, assistants, and camera staff. The mood was heavy. The silver-haired producer stood at the front with folded arms. "We have a situation," he said sharply. "The press has blown this out of control. They're saying we stopped production because of personal issues. Sponsors are calling. We need damage control." The room filled with whispers. Sandra sat near the back, silent. Keanu sat beside her, his cane resting by his leg. The producer continued. "The studio expects us to release a statement saying the accident was minor and that filming continues smoothly. We'll also clarify that no one interfered with the management." Sandra frowned. "So we lie?" she asked softly. The producer turned toward her, his tone clipped. "We protect the brand." "That's not lying. That's strategy." Keanu looked at Sandra, sensing her rising anger. Before she could speak, he raised his hand slightly. "What if we tell the truth?" he said calmly. "What if we talk about what really matters? That this wasn't a setback, it was a moment of humanity. That the crew came together, that no one was left behind." The producer shook his head. "That won't calm investors." Keanu's eyes stayed steady. "It might calm people," he said. The room went silent. The crew watched him with respect, waiting. Sandra saw it too, the quiet power of his voice, the strength in his calmness. The producer sighed. "You're both impossible," he muttered. "Fine, you want the truth? Handle it yourselves. But don't expect us to clean up the mess." As he walked out, Sandra whispered, "We just made enemies." Keanu smiled faintly. "Then let's make them worth it." That evening, they recorded a short video message together. The camera was simple, no lights, no scripts. They sat side by side in a small cabin, the northern lights faintly glowing through the window behind them. Keanu began softly. "Hi, everyone. I know you've seen the news. Yes, I was hurt during a stunt, but I'm okay. It was a hard day, but it reminded me that movies aren't made by machines. They're made by people. And sometimes people need time to heal," Sandra continued, her voice steady. "We paused the shoot not because of ego, but because of care. Because when someone you respect is in pain, you stop everything until they're safe. That's not drama. That's humanity." Keanu looked at her, then at the camera. "Thank you to everyone who sent messages and prayers. Your kindness means more than you know. We'll be back soon, stronger, safer, and grateful." They ended with a quiet smile. There was no performance, no rehearsed line, just truth. When the video went live, the reaction was unexpected. Millions of viewers shared it within hours. Hashtags changed from criticism to support. People wrote comments like, "This is what real friendship looks like," And kindness is not weakness. Journalists began retracting false claims. Even the studio issued a statement praising their honesty, but while the public softened, not everyone in the industry was pleased. Sandra received a call from an old executive she once worked with. His voice was sharp. "You made us look bad," he said. "We made you look human," she replied calmly. He hung up without another word. Later that night, as snow started falling again, Sandra sat outside the cabin staring at the dark sky. Keanu walked out slowly, wrapped in a blanket. He handed her a mug of hot chocolate and sat beside her. "You did something brave today," he said. She smiled faintly. "We both did." "No," he said softly. "You spoke when I might have stayed silent. That matters." She looked at him, her breath misting in the cold air. "You know what I realized?" "What?" "The world watches for mistakes, but sometimes they just need to see someone care." He nodded slowly. "And maybe caring is the only thing that survives when everything else fades." They sat quietly, listening to the wind move through the snow. The lights from the northern sky flickered softly above them, reflecting on the icy ground like stars fallen to earth. In that moment, neither fame nor fear mattered. What mattered was the truth they shared, the courage to be kind when it was easier to be silent. And though the storm outside had calmed, another test was waiting. Because the next morning, when filming resumed, fate would strike again, not with injury this time, but with a choice that would change both their lives forever. The next morning was brighter than any before. Sunlight spilled across the icy hills, making the frozen lake near the set shimmer like glass. The air smelled of new beginnings, but everyone on the team could feel the tension. It was the first day of filming after the accident, and all eyes were on Keanu. The director gathered the crew. "We'll start with the dialogue scenes only," he said quickly, avoiding eye contact with Sandra. "No stunts, no risks." Keanu walked slowly onto the set, his leg still bandaged under his costume. He carried his cane in one hand, but his eyes were full of quiet determination. The crew greeted him with gentle applause. He smiled, nodded, and said softly, "Thank you for waiting. Let's make something beautiful." Sandra stood beside him, watching with pride and worry. She knew he wasn't fully healed. Every step looked painful, though he hid it behind calm eyes. The camera started rolling. Keanu began his scene, his voice steady, his expression deep. But midway through the shot, his hand trembled. It was barely visible, but Sandra noticed. She could feel something wasn't right. The director shouted, "Cut!" But Keanu waved it off. "I can do it," he insisted. "No, you can't," Sandra said quietly, stepping forward. "Please," he whispered, trying to stay strong. "I need to finish this." "You need to stop pretending you're invincible," she said, her voice soft but firm. For a moment, everything stopped. The wind slowed. The crew went silent. Keanu lowered his eyes, breathing hard. She walked closer, placed a hand on his shoulder, and said, "You've carried everyone for so long. Let someone carry you now." He looked up, and in his eyes there was no pride, only pain mixed with gratitude. He nodded slightly. "Just for a little while," he said. The crew helped him back to the cabin. The director sighed and called for a break. Everyone scattered, unsure of what to do next. Inside the cabin, Sandra helped Keanu sit near the fire. His hands were cold. She wrapped a blanket around him and sat down across from him. "You don't have to prove anything," she said softly. "Maybe I'm not trying to prove anything," he replied. "Maybe I just don't want people to think I'm weak." She leaned closer. "Kindness isn't weakness, Keanu. It's courage in slow motion." He smiled faintly. "You always know what to say." "Only when you're being stubborn," she said. They both laughed quietly. Outside, snow began to fall again, light and slow like the world was listening. But then a sudden knock came at the door. A crew member entered, holding a small envelope. "For you," he said, handing it to Keanu. Keanu opened it and read the letter silently. His face changed, first confusion, then disbelief. "What is it?" Sandra asked. He handed her the paper. It was a message from the studio. The words were clear. Production halted indefinitely until Reeves signs liability waiver for future stunts. Refusal may lead to contract termination. Sandra's jaw tightened. They can't do this. You're injured, and they're threatening your job? Keanu sighed. It's not new. It's business. She shook her head. No, it's cruelty. He looked at her calmly. They're scared. Accidents cost money. They think signing this will protect them. And put you at risk, she said. He stayed silent. The fire crackled between them. Finally, he said, I'll sign it. No, she said immediately. You can't. I have to. Too many people depend on this film. If I walk away, hundreds lose their jobs. And if something happens to you? She asked, her voice trembling. He looked at her with a quiet smile. Then at least it was for something bigger than me. Sandra stood up, pacing the small cabin. You're unbelievable. You're always giving everything, even when it hurts you. He smiled softly. Maybe that's just how I was raised. Kindness doesn't come with conditions. She stopped walking and looked at him. Then let me be kind too. Before he could answer, she grabbed the letter, took a pen, and wrote her own name at the bottom of the paper beside his. Keanu's eyes widened. What are you doing? He asked. Sharing the risk? She said. If something happens to you, it happens to me too. You don't have to. Yes, I do, she interrupted. Because friendship means standing in the fire together. For a long moment, neither spoke. Keanu looked at her with quiet awe. The snow outside reflected in his eyes, and for the first time since the accident, he looked peaceful. The next day, when the producers received the signed letter, they were stunned. The headlines quickly followed. Sandra Bullock signs joint liability to protect co-star Keanu Reeves. Hollywood's act of friendship leaves the internet speechless. Millions of fans around the world reacted with tears and admiration. Comments poured in calling them true partners, the face of loyalty, and proof that kindness still exists. The studio, under public pressure, withdrew the clause entirely. Filming resumed within days, but something deeper had changed. The crew worked with new energy, inspired by what they had witnessed. During one of the last scenes, a quiet dialogue between their characters, the director whispered to the cameraman, "Don't cut early. Let it play out." In that scene, Keanu's character says, "Sometimes the strongest people are the ones who choose gentleness." And Sandra's character replies, "And sometimes the bravest hearts are the ones that refuse to walk away." The camera captured their real emotion. It wasn't acting anymore. It was truth. When the scene ended, the crew stood still, realizing they had just witnessed something beyond cinema, a moment of pure humanity. That night, the director approached both of them. His voice shook as he said, "I've made hundreds of films, but this one will be remembered not for what we shot, but for what you two taught us." Keanu smiled and said quietly, "Then maybe we finally did something right." Outside, the northern lights blazed stronger than before, painting the frozen world in colors of green and gold. Sandra looked up at them and whispered, "Do you think it's over now?" Keanu looked at the sky, then at her. "No," he said softly. "Kindness doesn't end. It just moves from one heart to another." They stood side by side, watching the light dance across the sky. Two souls who had faced pain, doubt, and pressure, and chosen compassion every time. What they didn't know was that one final surprise was still waiting, a revelation that would turn their quiet act of kindness into a message for the whole world. A week later, the final day of filming arrived. The cold wind had softened, and the frozen valley seemed calmer than ever. The movie's last scene was set at sunrise, where both characters would walk away from a burning wreck, leaving behind a story of survival and hope. It felt poetic, almost too real. The entire crew gathered early, knowing this shoot would mean more than just a wrap. Everyone could feel the emotion in the air, the weight of everything they had gone through. From the accident to the rumors, from the headlines to the silent nights of pain and recovery, the journey had tested every heart on that set. Keanu stood quietly near the edge of the lake, his legs still a little stiff but stronger now. Sandra joined him, wrapped in a warm jacket. She handed him a thermos of coffee and smiled. "You ready for your last scene?" she asked softly. He smiled back. Only if you're beside me. Always, she said. The director gave final instructions, but his tone was gentle. Even he looked emotional. We'll do one take, he said. No cuts, just walk. Be yourselves. As the cameras rolled, Keanu and Sandra began to walk together across the frozen ground. Their characters were supposed to walk away from destruction, but in truth, they were walking toward healing. No acting, no pretense. Just two friends who had survived something far greater than any script. The light grew stronger behind them, turning the snow golden, and in that glow, every hardship melted into something beautiful. When the director shouted, "Cut!" no one moved. The silence that followed was sacred. The crew clapped slowly, then louder until the valley echoed with applause. Tears filled many eyes. The film was done, but something much deeper had been born. Trust, respect, and a kind of quiet love that asked for nothing in return. Sandra turned to Keanu and said, "That wasn't just a scene, was it?" He shook his head. "No, that was goodbye to everything we've been carrying." She smiled faintly. "And hello to what comes next." That evening, as the crew packed up equipment, a small ceremony was held inside the main cabin. The director stood at the center, holding a simple wooden box. "This isn't from the studio," he said. "This is from all of us." He opened the box and revealed two silver pendants shaped like intertwined hands. Engraved on them were the words, "For choosing kindness when it was hardest." The crew presented one to Sandra and one to Keanu. Neither of them could speak for a moment. Keanu finally said softly, "Thank you. But you all deserve this more than we do." The lighting technician shook his head. "No, sir. You reminded us why we love doing what we do. You made us believe good people still exist here." The room went quiet again, but it wasn't sad. It was full of warmth, the kind of silence that only truth creates. Later that night, long after everyone had gone to sleep, Sandra sat outside the cabin under the northern lights. The sky shimmered in ribbons of green and blue. Keanu walked out quietly, holding 2 mugs of hot tea. He sat beside her and handed her one. "You ever think about how strange life is?" she asked. "Every day," he replied. "One fall changes everything. And sometimes it fixes everything too," she said softly. He nodded. "Yeah, maybe the universe doesn't test us to break us. Maybe it just wants to see how far kindness can go." She smiled, her eyes glistening in the faint light. And we didn't let it stop. Keanu looked up at the sky, watching the colors move like waves. "You know, I used to think success was about finishing something. Now I think it's about finishing it with grace." "You did that," she said gently. "We did," he replied. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. The lights above shimmered brighter, almost as if the sky itself was listening. Then Sandra said quietly, "I never told you this, but when you got hurt that day, I realized something. I wasn't afraid of losing a co-star. I was afraid of losing a good soul in a world that needs more of them." Keanu looked at her, his voice barely a whisper. "And I realized something too. When I woke up in that tent, the first thing I saw was your face. And I thought maybe this is what real friendship looks like. The kind that stays when the cameras stop." She smiled, tears forming in her eyes. "Then I guess we did something more than make a movie." "We made a memory," he said softly. "And maybe, if someone watching this learns to be a little kinder, that'll be the real ending." She nodded. "A kindness that never fades." The next day, the entire crew flew home. Weeks later, when the movie was released, the world saw not just a story, but a feeling. The behind-the-scenes footage of their journey went viral. People cried watching Sandra run to help Keanu after the crash. They replayed the interviews where both spoke about compassion, trust, and the strength of humanity. Messages poured in from around the globe. One fan wrote, "You reminded us that heroes don't only exist on screen, they exist in kindness." Another wrote, "Thank you for proving that respect still matters." Months later, at an award ceremony in Los Angeles, the film won honors for inspiration and impact. But when Sandra and Keanu stood on stage, they didn't talk about fame or success. Keanu simply said, "This award belongs to everyone who chose kindness when it wasn't easy." And Sandra added, "We may play heroes, but the real ones are those who care without reason." The audience rose to their feet in silence before the applause began. Not just for their work, but for what they stood for. That night, when they left the stage, Keanu looked at Sandra and said softly, "Do you think people will remember this?" She smiled. "Maybe not the movie, but they'll remember the message." And as they walked away from the bright lights of Hollywood into the quiet of the night, one truth remained. Kindness is the only story that never ends.